Hey Teaheads, this is Don from Mayleaf. In this video, how long should you brew tea? In this video, we're going to indulge in a bit of brewing geekery to figure out how length of brewing time affects the taste and experience in the cup. If at any point in time you enjoy this video, then make sure you hit it with a like. And if you're not following us on all of our socials yet, go click those buttons. We are here. Okay, this is episode number 2 of our Gong Fu Master Brewing classes. If you missed episode number 1, it was all about how brewing temperature affects the taste and experience of your tea. You can go check it out, but don't worry, we're going to do a quick recap now. At the end of our last episode, we came to these conclusions that as you increase brewing temperature, you're going to increase the potential level of bitterness that you're extracting into the tea. You're also going to increase the level of astringency or dryness. That means that you're going to have a more structured finish, a longer finish, which means that the taste, aroma will persist for longer and the feeling in the mouth will persist for longer. Also, the aromatics and taste of the tea is going to shift in terms of EQ more towards the basier end of the spectrum. What I mean by that is that those bright, ethereal notes, those very high aromatics start to get shaved off and the flavor profile starts to go much more into the deeper, woodsier notes of the tea. We also found out that the temperature doesn't have a huge effect on the level of sweetness, savoriness, and viscosity or thickness of the tea liquor. But what about brewing time? So what we're going to do today is, again, take away all variables apart from brewing time. So we have the same teaware, the same temperature water. The only difference is brewing time. What you need to do if you want to drink along with us is get 2 pieces of teaware, same material, same capacity, ideally identical teawares, so that even the teaware shape is not a variable in this experiment. And then take your tea. I have Sip Spring here. For those of you who watched the last video and picked up Sip Spring because I told you we were going to do it with Sip Spring, then you can really do a perfect comparison with me on this to see if you get the same results. And we're going to be running some polls on YouTube. So if you're watching us on YouTube, you will see some polls pop up here so that you can tell us your opinion. If you don't have Sip Spring, that's fine. You can do this experiment with other teas. However, I would recommend you use a green oolong because green oolongs just sit at that cusp between the green teas and the darker teas, and I find that they're more sensitive to these kinds of parameters. Right, let's get going. We're going to do a brew. We're going to use 95-degree water. That's 205 Fahrenheit. And I'm going to brew one at about 15 seconds and one at about 45 seconds. What you need to do is get a stopwatch in front of you. Right, I've got that. And now we're going to quickly rinse the tea leaves. I think that's important. We want to open these leaves up so that it's ready for your first infusion. So quick rinse. You don't have to fill up the Gaiwan or the pot. Just give them a quick rinse. Leave the lid on afterwards just to let the leaves start to expand. That's going to help to boost up the level of extraction. On our first brew, we'll give some to this little tea pet here, little fish. Okay, pour the rest away. Okay, now, while they're in front of us, it would be rude not to give them a quick smell. I'm not going to do a full 10-step tasting, obviously, for Sip Spring. Let's give it a smell, though. Lots of alpine air, high alpine air, flowers. I'm getting sweet flowers, but very fresh as well. Very early spring flowers, white flowers, carnations. I'm also getting some creaminess. There's a kind of alpine creaminess and grassiness, but there's definitely a creamy note to this tea. And a slight sour fruitiness as well. Oh, I love this. It's so bright. It's so reminiscent of spring, which is why we call it Sip Spring. Okay, right. Now, you can watch along first and then do your brew so you can see what I'm doing. But I'm going to get my stopwatch ready. And I'm going to pour 95-degree water, 205 Fahrenheit, into this one. Immediately put the lid on, and quickly pour into this one, put the lid on, turn my stopwatch on, and I'm going to be pouring this one out at 15 seconds and pouring the other one out at 45 seconds. It's not a big deal in terms of the accuracy of that time, because really all we're trying to do is make sure that there's a big difference in the time of brewing so that we can assess how that affects the taste, aroma, texture, all of those good things in the cup. Here we go, 37 seconds. So we're going to pour this out about 45 seconds. So if you're watching along, you can start to do this now, and then we can taste together. Right, let's stop this stopwatch and let's take a quick look at the liquor here. Surprisingly, the liquor doesn't look that different in terms of the color. It goes to show you that color isn't everything in terms of a judge. They look pretty identical to me, actually. Maybe slightly darker, slightly less bright than this one, but not much difference between them at all. Okay, here we go. I don't want to mix them up, so I'm going to move this pet out of the way. Here we go. So fill up a cup with your 15-second and then your 45-second brew. Very important that you allow these to cool down slightly. That's the beautiful thing about Gong Fu brewing. These small cups allow the tea to cool down a little bit. You don't want to taste it boiling hot. Right, first thing to note, you will all know that longer brewing means that you're going to have a stronger tasting tea. So what we want to try to do when we're tasting this and we're assessing the differences between these two brews is to try to factor that in. We know that the strength is going to be stronger. But how are all the other factors that we talked about in the previous video affected by brewing time? Cheers, everybody. We're going to focus on viscosity first, like we did in the first video. Viscosity. For me, this is thin to medium. And what I'm talking about is how thick it feels in the mouth. 45 second. For me, a lot thicker. A lot thicker. It's almost harder to swallow, as in it's denser. There's more viscosity in this tea compared to this one here, in my opinion. But what do you think? A poll, if you're watching on YouTube, will pop up right here. Make sure you take part in that poll so that you can let us know what you think about it. One more time. Yeah. Definitely, to my mind, a thicker consistency, more viscosity in the longer brew. All right, let's move on to taste and aroma. Very, very, very important part of the appreciation process. Again, you've got to try to ignore the level, the strength difference, and just focus on the aroma EQ that has been extracted from the tea. And in my opinion, this has those creamy notes. I'm getting those high mountain flowers that we talked about in the smell of the wet leaf. It's very bright, it's very airy. There's nothing very deep about it. There's nothing very sour about it. There's nothing very woodsy about it. It's very, very light, bright, kind of ethereal tasting. 45-second brew, definitely different. I'm getting a distinct sourness on the sides of my tongue, and that comes from the fact that the water has had time to penetrate into these leaves and start to dissolve those sappier notes in the leaf, those dissolved solids in the leaf, giving more of that green note to it. Definitely more sour, definitely more stewed tasting. I don't know if you're getting that, but for me, definitely more stewed tasting. Those bright, light, ethereal notes, those aromatics, have been shaved off. I'm not getting so much of them compared to the 15-second brew. Definitely, I'm getting those creamy notes. I'm getting those flower notes. It's just brighter. It's further up in the mountains, whereas here, now I'm in the long grass a little bit. I'm getting more of those stewed notes, as I said, more of those sappy sour notes. I'm also getting slightly more woodsy notes in there. Don't get me wrong, there's still creaminess, there's still some floral notes, but not as much. But I'm also getting a little bit more juiciness and a little bit more fruitiness out of this one. I'm getting those star fruits that I pick up in the tasting notes for this tea. Star fruits, slightly sour fruits. So for me, longer brewing time EQs the flavor profile more towards those deeper, darker, dankier notes compared to the shorter brewing time. Let us know what you think. A poll will pop up here. Let us know your thoughts so that we can compare it with mine. So for me, definitely longer brewing time means that the flavor profile shifts. Is that because the volatile aromatics that we're picking up in this one, those volatile aromatics are very fragile, and so when you're brewing it for a longer period of time, they have more chance to dissipate? Or is it simply because there's more extracted chemicals and compounds from this one here, and so that shifts the balance and you just don't notice those aromatics as much? Let's move on to bitterness and astringency. 15-second one. I don't get any bitterness really, and I get a slight astringency. It's dry, but kind of clean dry, and nothing particularly extreme. The 45-second one, definitely, to my taste, slightly more bitter. Not a lot, but slightly more bitter, and a lot more astringent. Definitely more dryness. I'm definitely feeling it in my mouth, this kind of puckering, drying sensation. So again, let us know your thoughts in the poll up here, but to my mind, length of brew increases bitterness slightly and increases astringency. Right, let's move on to something that's very related to that, and that is the structure and length of the finish. In other words, how long does the taste, aroma and texture of the tea persist in the mouth after you've swallowed? As I said before, this one feels very clean to me. After I've swallowed, if I breathe through my nose, yeah, I'm getting some of those aromatics, I'm getting flowers, I'm getting a little bit of fruitiness. It's very, very nice. I'm really, really enjoying it. It's very, very light. Whereas here, with that added astringency that comes from those dissolved solids, that comes from those minerals that are being pulled out of the leaf, the feeling persists for much longer. I'm getting juiciness, I'm getting saliva production, I'm getting through the nose a lot more fruitiness through the nose, a lot more persistent fruitiness and persistent aroma. So again, for me, the longer the brewing time, the more structured the finish and the longer the finish. Let us know your thoughts in that poll. All right, so we've covered the main sensorial experiences of tea. Of course, you can dive into more detail if you want. You could just focus on creaminess, just focus on fruitiness. Of course, you can do that. I'm not going to do that in this video. Let's try to summarize a little bit, and then we'll move on to explain the reasoning behind these differences. So, to my mind, the viscosity, thickness of the brew is higher the longer that you brew the tea. I also think that the taste EQ is definitely deeper, darker, dankier when you brew for longer compared to those light, bright, ethereal aromatics. Obviously, the strength of flavor, the strength of everything increases as you increase the brewing time. The bitterness and astringency definitely increases. Not as much as with temperature, I have to say, but it definitely increases with longer brewing times. And the length of finish, the structure of the finish is higher with longer brewing times. Let's start to try to kind of think of some analogies here as to what is going on with this brewing time. I've talked before in previous videos about how, to my mind, as a music producer in my previous life, the temperature of the water is related to the EQ of the resulting tea that you drink. In other words, the balance of each compound that is being extracted. And that is because different compounds are extracted at different rates at different temperatures. And so as you increase the temperature, you change the EQ balance. And I've said that the brewing time is related to the volume knob, how loud you turn up the strength of flavor. That's not strictly true. And well, it is true, and it's in the sense that it's the same as with music. So, for example, if you listen to music at low volume, you would want a slightly different EQ compared to a high volume. One of the challenges as a music producer always was to try to EQ the music that you are producing for a particular volume that you think it's going to be played. So for example, if you knew that the music was predominantly going to be played at a nightclub on big speakers, then you would probably be turning down the bass notes a little bit, because you know that at higher volume you experience more of that bass. Conversely, if you know that it's going to be played on very small speakers at very low volume, you would want to increase the bass, because as we all know, when you're hearing music at low volume, you tend to hear more of those kind of toppy notes, you tend to hear more of the sibilants, more of those kind of tinny sounds, and you don't hear so much of the bass. So it's exactly the same in tea, in that the EQ is set with the temperature, but the volume has a relationship. So knowing the length of your brew is going to impact what EQ you want to put on the tea, and vice versa. So it's not as simple as the balance of flavors is related to temperature, the strength is related to volume. The two are related. They work with each other. I hope that that makes sense. What I would like to do now is present you with another analogy, and it's an analogy that we're going to be using through future masterclasses. So please bear with me. It's an analogy that I came up with late last night, about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, lying in bed awake, trying to figure out how I'm going to express how I feel about brewing to you guys out there. So please just visualize this. Imagine a ramp. Yeah? And imagine that ramp is divided up into lanes, much like a racetrack. Okay, so you've got a ramp with lanes marked in. And imagine those lane lines are raised. So essentially you've got different corridors. Okay, so you've got lots of lanes that can't mix, right? So you've got lots of lanes on a ramp. Make sense so far? Now imagine that at the bottom of the ramp is a gate. Okay, and halfway up the ramp is another gate. Yes? So far with me? Right. Now, imagine that we fill up each lane with marbles above the gate, right? Above the halfway gate. We've got marbles filled up across those different lanes. And each lane contains a different type of marble. These marbles represent the compounds in the tea leaf. Some of these marbles are perfectly spherical. Some of these marbles are a little bit rougher. Some of these marbles are nearly square-shaped, right? So they're going to move down the ramp at different rates, okay? Right. At the bottom of the ramp is another gate, okay? And anything that passes through that gate is what is extracted into the tea liquor. I hope that you're following me. Okay, so the moment that I take dry leaf, right, that dry leaf has chemical components and constituents. Those are those marbles, and they are waiting above that top gate, waiting to be extracted, okay? The moment I pour hot water on those leaves, that upper gate opens, okay? And those marbles can start to move down towards the bottom gate, yes? Obviously, some are going to move down faster than others according to the shape of those marbles. Now, the temperature of the water, the brewing temperature, is related to the surface of that ramp. How much friction there is in that ramp. Is it something that's very, very slick, very, very greasy, that everything comes down very, very quickly, including those rougher marbles, those ones that are a little bit more irregular shaped? They still tumble down because there's not much friction. Or, in the case of cold brewing, you have a surface which has a lot of friction. It has a lot of friction on it, and therefore the spherical marbles will move down quite easily, but the others will not. And so you can start to control which marbles cross the finish line into your tea. Does this make sense? I hope it does. So the temperature is related to the friction of the surface of the ramp. The brewing time is related to how long you leave that bottom gate open. Okay, so if I pour hot water over leaves and I cover it, those marbles are going to start to move down the ramp. The rate at which they move down that ramp is related to two things. It's related to their shape, how spherical they are. That's essentially how soluble they are. But it's also related to the temperature, right? Because that is affecting the friction on the surface. And therefore, if you have a very hot temperature, you're making a very slick surface, then those more irregular shaped marbles will still make it past the bottom gate, right? So the rate at which they move down is affected by shape, water solubility, and friction, which is the temperature. How long you leave the gate open for is obviously going to have an effect on how much or how many of those marbles you collect, but also is going to have an effect on which ones you collect. Because if you close the gate very quickly, then all of those spherical marbles, you're going to get some of them through the gate, but you're not going to get some of those more irregular ones which take longer to reach the end of the ramp. Whereas if you leave the gate open for longer, then you're going to start to get more of those irregular marbles into your tea liquor in the end, and that is going to affect the balance. So this is how the length of brewing time not only affects the strength, in other words, how much you're collecting, but also the balance. Now, after you've done your first infusion, those marbles are kind of already loaded up, ready for you to open the gate. And that's why different infusions will have different flavor profiles. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in future masterclasses. I hope that marble analogy makes sense. If there are any people out there that are incredible computer graphics whiz kids animators, then I would be happy to try to visualize it with you guys out there, because I think that it really holds true for a lot of the parameters that we're going to be talking about in future episodes. Right, that brings me on to what's happening next. I know that in our last video, I said that I was going to show you how to brew sip spring in a particular way in order to get the best out of it. Unfortunately, this video is already taking up a lot of time. So in the next video, what we're going to be doing is talking about the leaf to water ratio, and I will be showing you that technique to brew a lot of teas. It's quite a unique technique to brew a lot of teas in a way that I think is really, really incredible. I hope that this experiment has given you some clarity and practical experience in how brewing time affects the taste, aroma, and texture of your tea. When you combine that information with what we learned from the previous episode about brewing temperature, we're starting to develop a 3D model that is going to grow and take shape. I know that it's a little bit overwhelming at the moment. I'm throwing lots of analogies, some of them quite abstract at you, and we're kind of just getting a bit of experimental data together. I promise you that through these episodes, it'll start to take shape. You'll start to be able to see it a little bit more clearly. Don't worry if it's a bit confusing right now. Just stick with it, and eventually you will be a Gong Fu brewing master. That is my oath to you. That's it, tea heads. If you made it to the end of this video, then make sure you hit it with a like. Follow us on all of our socials so that you don't miss out on any news and videos from Mayleaf HQ. If you're ever in London, then come visit us in Camden to say hi and taste our wares. If you have any questions, comments, or video ideas, then please fire them over. Other than that, I'm Don from Mayleaf. Thank you for being a part of the revelation of true tea. Stay away from those tea bags, keep drinking the good stuff, and spread the word, because nobody deserves bad tea. Bye.